Hey y'all, welcome back to the channel. I'm Emily Bowie. I'm a producer and engineer here in Nashville, Tennessee. If you're new here to the channel, please consider hitting the subscribe button. And if this was a video that you enjoyed, hit the thumbs up and leave me a comment. Let me know that you stopped by. This video is part one of a multi-part series where we go over basic Pro Tools topics and throw in a few tips along the way. I do have timestamps available for your convenience, so you're free to jump around. All I ask is if you could please hit the subscribe button, like this video if it is something that you enjoyed, and leave me a comment. Let me know that you stopped by. So let's jump into part one and get started. So the very first thing that you'll need to do is create a new session. So we'll get Pro Tools opened here. First window that you're going to get is this dashboard window. You've got a couple of options here to create, show your recent projects, and then your projects. The one that we're going to be focusing on today is just creating a new session. If you had already had some sessions up, they would be in your recent folder here, and your projects is going to be something that you'll have to have access to the cloud. I don't use the cloud, so we'll just create a regular session here. This is where you'll name that session, and we're just going to have it test session. This will be where you'll name your song or whatever project that you're working on. Then you got a couple of things below that: local storage, your collaboration and cloud backup, and create from template. I just always go with local storage here. I don't bother with the cloud. If I want to share a project with someone, then I'll just end up sending the Pro Tools session to them through an email. You've also got create from template. This is a couple of templates that come with Pro Tools. You can also have them saved here. I do use templates, but when I import those, I'm just going to import session data, which we'll get into a little bit later. So for right now, we're just going to create a session without using any sort of templates. On down, this is very important. You'll need to select your file type, and I do suggest that you always just stick with WAV. Over here on sample rate, I believe the default setting is 44.1K, but to me, the new standard is going to be 48K and 24-bit. You can also go back down to 16, say if you were going to be using 44.1, but 24-bit is pretty standard with a sample rate at 48K. Now your I/O settings here, I typically just have it on last used. Of course, you've got some stock settings that come with Pro Tools. I've got a stereo mix here, but I usually just use what was used last because I'm not really changing anything. Now this interleave section here, you're also going to have that option when you bounce out your stereo mix, so we won't bother with that right now. If you had that selected, it would mean that you would be getting your stereo mix. Unchecked would mean that you would be printing that out as two tracks, your left and right. They would both be mono tracks, but it would be your left side and your right side separately. Now, prompt for location. I've got it to where that I can select the location that I want to set that to. And this is where, if you have an external hard drive, that's where you'll pick. I have my external hard drive, Fair Music here, this year's hard drive, and I've gone ahead and made a folder in my external drive called test session folder. That way I know that this song is going to go into that folder. If this was a song, I would probably have that folder labeled as the overall project. If it was an album and an EP, or if it was just the song that I'm mixing or recording, then I would have that song title stating that would be the project. That would be the name of the folder. But for right now, test session will go under test session folder, and then we'll hit create. But first, I'd like to share with you my brand new mixing course where I go in depth, 4+ hours of video mixing retro pop rock style music. It's super popular these days. There's tons of playlists of this type of music on Spotify already. And this course will help you get better at mixing this style of music. You get 4 hours of mixing videos with tips and tricks and techniques along the way. All of the multi-tracks are included so that you can mix this yourself, practice, add production. They are yours to keep. You can put these on your website and build up your portfolio. Let everybody know that you can mix this style of music. My brand new mixing template is also included in this. It's not available anywhere else alone by itself. So download it now at its discount summer sale price. All right, back to the basics. Okay, so when you open up that new session, it'll be blank. It won't look like this. I've just gone ahead and pulled in a couple of audio tracks here just so that we can have a look at what things are gonna come up as when you start importing tracks, and so we can take a look at some of the navigation features here. So the first thing that we're going to look up here in our edit window is our edit modes. We have 4 of them, and technically 5 because grid does come with a second. So if I'm in shuffle mode, I'm not going to be able to move any of these tracks, as you see, because one clip can't be moved. So if I go in here and I break a section here, let's do it this way. So I've got this piece here. So if I needed to move that, it's only going to go somewhere where there is no break. So if I say had this shortened here, it's going, and I make an edit, it's going to snap to the next part of that clip where there's not going to be any sort of gap in there. So this is good for podcast. If I'm going to be cutting out some of those blank spots where I take a look at my notes, or I need to make an edit of some noise or anything like that, it's always going to go and fill in that space. I don't use this a whole lot, but it is something that is pretty good for when you have video and you say, so I made a selection here and I'm going to hit delete, and it pops it right next to the next audio clip. The next edit mode we have is spot, and really you're not going to be able to move anything without this window coming up, this dialog window, and it's kind of just what it says. It's going to put it in the spot that you type in to tell it where it starts, or if you have a sync place that you want to put that in. So that's getting pretty specific with your edits. And next is a very common edit mode. This is slip, and it's basically what it says. You can slip a clip into any part of the grid that you want. It's not going to snap anywhere, so you can put it, over tracks here. You're not limited to what the grid says. And then for grid, exactly what that says. This is going to snap to the grid that you have selected here. You'll select that up here. We're in quarter notes right now. We can go up or down here, or even to just showing what one bar would look like. So I'm in quarter notes here, and as you can see, when I move it, it snaps to the next quarter. So this is referred to as absolute grid, and I can move that whole clip, snaps into place. So what if I'm say I want to go in between the bar here. So I'm halfway in between the bar there with my clip. If we go to relative grid, now when I want to change this to say just showing one bar, I can keep that position. So if I was just in absolute grid and I went back to just showing one bar, this would automatically connect or snap to the next bar. But since I'm in relative grid mode, I can keep this relative position in between the bars. So when I push up to move a space, it goes in between. Now, a little tip here is if you don't see your grid marks, so let's go back, let's go to 1/8 here. If you don't see your grid lines, that's because this button right here is not highlighted. So if I uncheck that, they disappear. So all you have to do is just make sure that that is highlighted in green. Pro tip, if you kind of want to go back and forth between the two, but you don't want to have to keep going up here and selecting slip or grid, which one you're in. So right now we're in absolute grid, and we're moving here or snap into the grid. But if I didn't want to go up there and change back to slip, but I needed to slip it just a little bit, all you need to do is hold down the command key and just move it. While you have the command key pressed down, you're able to move this in slip mode. And vice versa, if I was in slip mode and I needed to snap that to the grid, I just hold down command, and now we're moving to the grid, even though I'm still in slip mode. Nice little trick. Makes your editing workflow a lot quicker. All right, moving on to a couple of navigation keys here. We've got our track zoom. So if you hit up, the audio tracks will increase in size. They will not increase in volume. Same with decreasing them. Just so if something you were given was really small like this and you weren't sure if there was any audio on there, you can always just crank up the visual there and zoom in on the audio to make sure that there is actual audio on that track. This key next to it for MIDI zoom in and out is the exact same thing. It is just for MIDI tracks. And we can zoom out and zoom in. Short keys for that is command brackets. So your command bracket left zooms out and command bracket on the right zooms in. Now these number keys here are pretty cool. You can actually set these to a certain zoom that you like. So one I have is all the way out and going in a little bit closer each time. You can also press the 1 through 5 key on your keyboard to do the same thing. Your zoom toggle key here goes for whatever track you have selected, and we can just zoom in that whole piece. If I wanted to do that with the bass, same thing. So if you have your cursor somewhere and you're like, something's going on there, but I can't tell, instead of having to go down here and pull this out and then zoom in, all you have to do is click right there and shows you where you're at. Zoom controller tool, if you have that clicked, you can just zoom in on a specific section and look in there. Next to that, we've got our main smart tools. And the reason that they are smart tools is because you can click right here in the border that surrounds all three of them, and they're all three selected. And what that does is gives you all three tools. So as you can see, when you're hovering on the top part of the track, you've got your selection tool there where you can make selections. You've got a smart tool in the middle here to where I have this set to where I can increase the gain or decrease it. And on the bottom, you have your grabber tool. Of course, you can have all of these individually clicked if you want. And the ones with the arrows that point down, if you just click on that, you've got some other options in your separation. If you want to pick something out, but I just usually keep it on this. It's very standard workflow. This is a cool tool. This is a scrubber tool that you can go in and hear what the audio is. So for certain hits, you can, if you think there's a pop somewhere that you can find easily by just scrubbing the audio. And if you think something might sound cool in a reverse, in a swell or something, that's where you can kind of test out that sound. It's a really cool tool. And next is the pencil tool where you can write in stuff. You can write in automation, you can write in pans, mutes, all of that stuff. And this is a few options that you can have. You can have different patterns already selected here for you. So if you selected the triangle pattern here and you wanted to do some volume automation on that, then it would automatically have that pattern. You usually just keep that on the freehand, and freehand is just what it says. You can write all kinds of stuff however you want. Under that, there's a few buttons that I like to always have selected, and that is the tab to transient. It is exactly what it says. wherever you have your cursor set, you can hit the tab key and it will tab to the next transient. Next is link, timeline, and edit selection. This is very important to have selected, in my opinion, because wherever I want to play, so if I wanted to play this section right here, on my timeline has also been selected on that section. So if I'm playing that back, that is going to be the section and it's on loop. If that was not selected and we made a selection to play or loop, it would just keep playing. So it's a feature that I like to have always engaged. Next to that is link, track, and edit selection. So on this, you can make a selection on a track, hold down Shift, and just click on whatever track. So let's say we skip that and we'll have this one. So holding down Shift, I've selected the same amount on each track. So this would be good for something like drum editing. So if I wanted to make a selection here on my drums and have those edited, and I needed to move my overheads as well, and let's say the snare, I would hold down Shift, and with the selection tool up, click on the tracks that I also wanted to have the same selection. So just like that. So now I can edit those and move that entire selection somewhere else. Next to that is the insertion follows playback. So right now, if I wanted to play a section, when I stop, it goes back to where I've had that cursor placed. If I have this insertion follows playback selected, and I stop, it's now stopped where I hit pause. So kind of like playback on a tape machine. Instead of it having it go back to where I had it to begin with, now goes to where I stopped. I don't usually have that on because if I am listening to something, then I'm probably going to want to listen to it a couple of times, so I usually don't have that engaged. Moving on, we've got the automation follows edit, and what that does is basically what it says. So let's go back to our overhead here, and we'll pull down our volume automation. So let's draw in some of those same triangle line automation that we have here. So now, go back to your selection tool. If I make an edit on this, it's also highlighting the automation. If I did not have that engaged, then that would just be making the edit for the actual track and not the automation. So having that on is probably a good idea. Next to that, we've got mirrored MIDI editing. Exactly what it says. Anything that you do in your MIDI track or a MIDI clip. So let's say that this track right here was a MIDI track and I got a loop going and I've duplicated that out to make a whole verse. Well, on that first clip, if I decided I need to change the key of that or change any sort of thing about it, any changes that I make to that first clip will also be mirrored in the rest of those clips on the same track. Next thing here is layered editing. This is pretty cool. So I've got this selection here, and let's go ahead and turn that off. And if I want to move this clip around and cover something, of course we cover it, but then I want to move that back. Now that clip has been erased. Well, with layered editing engaged, you can move that clip over, and then you decide not so good. When you move it back, the clip reappears. So that's kind of good. That's something that probably I would like to have engaged. Now moving on to our time window here, This is where we can change how we want to view things. If we want them in bars and beats, minute or seconds, any sort of time code, fret frame samples is also another one that I like to use when I'm trying to line things up, or if something is delayed a little bit, I can check that out in my sample window. But for the most time, this is just in bars and beats. This is showing where that starts, where it ends. So I put it here, then we're just on the start and the end. This is the same because there is no length. Of course, if we make a selection, it's going to tell us where it started, where it ended, and how long it was. And this is always going to show you where your cursor is at the moment. Over here, like I said, if you want to see your grids, make sure that it is highlighted in green. If not, you can take them away just like that. And you can change how you want to see that grid. If you want it in 16th notes, there you go. If you want it in eighths, quarter notes, that's where you change that. The nudge is how many samples you want to be able to nudge a clip over, and we'll get into that a little bit later in the series here. But that's where you'll adjust those measurements, and then you can double click and type in any one that you want. Now in our playback section, we have our pre-roll, post-roll, and fade in. We'll get into detail on that also a little bit later, but if you do want those engaged, again, highlight them in green. If they are not highlighted in green, they are not on. This is for clocking. You've got the same one over here, and that's for external clocking, if that's something that you want to get into. Now, all of your playback, fast forward, pretty self-explanatory right here. We're all used to these symbols. This is where your loop, I'm in loop, always in loop. And then record enable, of course. And you can also have that in your quick punch mode, which I like if I'm in recording, so that we can be playing along and then hit record in a spot that we need to punch in. And moving on to our last section on the edit toolbar here, we've got wait for note. That's going to be something that's associated with MIDI, and where it's not going to be triggered until the first note of that MIDI. And I don't really use it very much. Can't think that I've ever used it actually. Here is your metronome. And that is when that is engaged and you have a click track, you'll hear the click in there. MIDI merge, when that's engaged and you've got some MIDI going on, you're recording, that MIDI is going to be placed on top. So if you've got something recorded and you want to record over that, it's going to record over it and not get rid of it. If it is not engaged, then that new MIDI audio will replace the one underneath it. This is the conductor track. If this is engaged, then this is going to tell Pro Tools to follow the tempo map that you've given it. And the last button here is your MIDI time code. I don't use this. This is for when you have a MIDI cable hooked up, and press and to turn that on. That way you'll be sending your MIDI information through your MIDI cable. And that is a look at everything in the edit window toolbar. You know, there's a lot of stuff, but it's pretty self-explanatory, especially because you can hover over a lot of the buttons and it tells you what it is. And a lot of those are pretty self-explanatory, which is good because there can be a lot of things in Pro Tools that aren't explained very well, and there's also just not a lot of things online that really get into detail on how to use them, or videos that show how they're implemented. So I hope you enjoyed this part 1 on Pro Tools Basics and a look inside the edit window toolbar here. I hope you'll join me for part 2, where we go a little bit more in depth each time. Thanks so much for checking out this video. If it is something you enjoyed and you got something out of it, give it a thumbs up. And also don't forget to hit the subscribe button. I'd also love to hear from you. So leave me a comment, let me know you stopped by, and love to hear any of your thoughts or feedback or anything else that you would like me to cover a little bit more in depth. Please let me know. All right, thanks so much, y'all. We'll talk soon.